Do differences make a difference? Let's assume your company has made a significant commitment to leadership development as one of its strategies to increase capability and drive sustainable growth and earnings. Let's also assume that diversity and inclusion has been a key initiative in support of those objectives. Suppose, for the sake of argument, that any of your given metrics about that diversity initiative, whether you talk about representation, retention, engagement, performance, so forth, let's just assume that at each level of the organization, you have not shown as much movement as you desired. In effect, you haven't moved the needle. What it takes to do so really is no secret. One obvious ingredient is having a clearly defined business case. Probably even more importantly is having a clearly defined values case in conjunction with the business case. One of the reasons why we say that is because the truth is the business case for any particular initiative, has some movement to it based on the business climate. But when you think about your list of values, that governs your decision making in a different way and for a longer period of time. So for things like leadership development, for things like diversity and inclusion, strong argument would say that business case is certainly very compelling, but the values case has much more long-lasting implications. But let's assume that, you know that, and let's assume that you have it. What's still holding you back? Well, best practices and research have always pinpointed, I would say, two additional critical ingredients of a successful diversity initiative. The first of which is really having visible senior leadership. When I say visible senior leadership, it really is meant to talk about the highest level of senior leadership that's possible. Whether you're using terms like sponsorship, championship, advocacy, so forth. Probably the most critical element about that senior leadership role is that they are credible. We're all judged not so much on what we say and certainly not so much on what we intend as we are on what we do. So if your senior leaders are positioned to talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion, that's an important step. If they really need your support in coming across as credible in that representation and that endorsement of diversity, then that's the place you really have to focus on. A second key ingredient, quite frankly, and again, this is what I say contributes to the fact that there really are no secrets regarding this, is that it's significantly important for an organization to have both formal and informal support networks. When I say support, I certainly think about mentoring, sponsorships, networks, executive coaching. That's applicable, I know you're going to say that's applicable to most of everyone in the organization, and that is absolutely true. But if you look closely at it, then the question will become whether or not your targeted diversity categories of leadership are having the same access. It's very difficult to look at mentoring and coaching, just to start there, mentoring and sponsorship in particular, just to start there, without recognizing that it has slightly different implications when you're talking about gender, for instance, and race. Now, probably the closest thing to what might be a secret ingredient is the increasing importance that we have to place on the fundamental belief that differences do make a difference. You really should contrast that with this belief that we are better off having, for instance, a colorblind approach to our organization. I will never forget, standing in front of an organization talking about diversity, and someone said, in a pretty animated way, "I'm not sure why you keep talking about, being different and so forth, because, after the first few minutes, I didn't even notice that you were black." And I thought, did I just disappear on you? Do you understand how much Do you understand how much energy it takes for you not to notice the color of my skin being brown? And then why would you spend that amount of energy anyway? The connection I really want you to make is that when you think about the effective problem skills of leaders and organizations, it includes their ability, your ability to see a variety of pieces of data, to recognize the patterns in that variety of data, to recognize the similarities, to recognize the differences, to be able to use that recognition of differences as a way of coming up with a range of options. If I overlook some of those differences, I'm not likely to come up with what turns out to be the most effective solution. The difficulty when we talk about diversity and inclusion is not that you don't have the capacity to think that way, it's that something blocks you from recognizing differences like color, gender, and so forth. The same courage you use to recognize that one plant is not performing in the same way as another plant, the same courage it takes for you to recognize and admit that our projections are off because I'm seeing a different pattern of behavior. It's that same courage that is required for you to be willing to say, I notice a number of things about this person and this population. Included in that list might be demographic differences. Now, if my objective and my goal is to get to a place where I think that the organization or in this organization differences ultimately don't matter, you cannot get there without first recognizing it and processing it, asking yourself the question, what difference, if any, do these differences make? Do you have the courage to do that? Now, I do recognize that if you ask the question about differences, you have to be willing and able to deal with those differences. Greg Pennington, PennPoint Consulting.